I've rediscovered a pretty deep fascination with fighting games lately. They're a mix of two of my favorite things: quick, precise tech inputs and PvP. Unlike a lot of millennials who cover retro and older games, I didn't grow up during the arcade boom. Instead, a lot of my early exposure to fighting games was playing things like Mortal Kombat Armageddon, Tekken Tag Tournament, and Soul Calibur 2. My exposure to 16-bit fighting games was limited to Street Fighter 2 Special Champion Edition and Mortal Kombat 2. So today I want to go back in time a little bit. We're going to take a look at 5 Genesis fighting games. This entire list could just be Mortal Kombat and Street Fighter, so we aren't even gonna touch those here. Let's get started. The first game up on the list today is Eternal Champions, released in 1993. Unlike most fighting games at the time, EC was developed as a home console exclusive. It was one of the extremely small library of games made to work with the Sega Activator, a ring that players would stand in that would register their movements as moves in-game. Think of like a Power Glove, but on the floor. It was also apparently so successful that it warranted a sequel for the Sega CD, as well as 2 spin-off titles based on 2 of the fighters. A third game was planned and made it to development, but was cancelled early on because, and I quote, they channeled all of their resources into the Virtua Fighter series, which was more recognizable given its success in arcades. Honestly, this feels like a wasted opportunity more than anything. Instead of using this incredible, unique cast of characters designed by the legendary Ernie Chan, Sega executively preferred their cast of extremely boring, generic martial arts designs. Like, if they wanted to put the focus on Virtua Fighter, then why not find a way to merge these 2 IPs into one? Why not release the Saturn port of Virtua Fighter as Virtua Fighter Champions and include the characters from EC? I understand that Virtua Fighter was more successful in Japan, but Eternal Champions was more successful in North America. Sega went on to act like this game just didn't exist. They wanted to pretend that the success wasn't real, and one employee went on to describe that nobody was ever allowed to use any of the characters for any other properties. This is one of the very few times you'll ever hear me say this, but it needs to be said. Fuck you, Sega. This game is badass and a half. There's so much cool shit about it. The story, yes, there's a story, is that this figure named Eternal Champion is the being that maintains the balance between good and evil. The balance is in jeopardy, so Eternal Champion decides to enlist the help of a new champion. 7 people who've been killed before their time are thrown into a fighting competition, and the winner of that competition will be given life back moments before their death and the knowledge to change the future. Honestly, it's not bad. The gameplay is pretty similar to Street Fighter. It makes use of a full 6-button controller with each of the buttons mapped to a light, medium, and heavy punch and a light, medium, and heavy kick. I don't quite understand how the special moves work, but I do know that every once in a while inputting a typical direction combination with an action will perform a special move. Some characters have objectively more range than others, some do a substantially larger amount of damage, some of them have greater mobility, but none of it ever feels unbalanced. The tournament ladder is handled a little bit differently than most other fighting games. Usually when you lose, you'll be met with a countdown timer and the chance to insert a coin and press start to try again. When you do that, usually you'll be sent back to the fight you were just playing as long as you picked the same character. In this game, you don't get a timer or a chance to pick a character. You also don't immediately get a rematch. Instead, you get set back by 1 fight. I don't mind the fight setback, but not having a countdown timer that lets me easily end the game is kind of a hassle. I couldn't figure out how to exit a fight with the game on and return to the main menu, so my solution was just to reset the system. And I think the game forces you to do this because it wants to show off. Every time you reset the console, a different character will do something to the Sega logo. It's neat for sure, but it's no reason to sacrifice the convenience of being able to quit a match. That's my only real complaint though. This game is really good and worth looking at today if you're a fan of fighting games. Next up, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles Tournament Fighters, again released in 1993. Bro, do you remember that part in Ninja Turtles where April O'Neil kicked the shit out of the purple Leonardo? Yeah, neither do I. But then again, I'm not up on my Turtles lore. I also don't know who the fuck Ray Fillet and Syphilis are, but both of these characters broke the emulator during rendering, so I don't care about them. This game is pretty poorly made for a tournament fighter. I mean that sincerely. It doesn't look bad, necessarily, and it doesn't feel bad, it functions, but only 2 of the 3 Sega Genesis face buttons are used for fighting. You have a punch and kick. There's a taunt button. There are special standard moves, but the hit detection is just weird and wonky. It doesn't feel good. The game itself is also like empty and lifeless. It's a Street Fighter clone, but bad. This is one of those games where you mash buttons, and sometimes you alternate between those buttons. Sometimes you jump, sometimes you block. There's no real sense of balance between characters, and that lack of balance is most obvious with Raphael and April O'Neil. Raphael has the single most abusable special move in the game. April is severely underpowered. I didn't play this one for very long, mostly because it isn't fun. The target audience for this game is toddlers that have never seen or played a fighting game before. Third game on the list is Pit Fighter, and we've looked at this one once already in my 5 Master System fighting games video. This specific port of the game looks miles better than the last one, and it functions better too. My strategy of pick the speed guy worked out much better this time than it did last time, mostly because hits actually register much more clearly and easily. Picking up items is also significantly better. It doesn't require that dumb single pixel precision. Something that the other version of the game didn't have was the ability to do jumps and jump attacks, which is a good inclusion, but feels sort of weird in this fake 3D space. Despite the good things that this game does, there are a slew of things that make it just awful. The things that are supposed to be shuriken are swastikas, which is a severely questionable design decision. The game acknowledges your wins with stupid-ass phrases like awesomely done and totally studly. It's still a button masher where you alternate between the punch and the kick button, except this time it's too offensive for kids and too stupid for adults. 2 for 2 in the pile of shit department. Every time I think about this game I get sad because there are more ports of this, and I plan on covering them as well. I don't expect any of them to be good, and even with that expectation I feel like it'll be worse than I'm expecting. Game number 4 is Primal Rage, and this port of the game specifically was released in 1995. This game is weird, and the crazy lore behind its development is enough to warrant its own video, so I'll just tell you about my experience playing it. On pressing the start button, I was met with one of the most unusual character select screens I've ever seen. There are 7 playable characters. 2 of them are monkey, and the rest of them are dinosaur-type creatures. Picking the monkeys would be the obvious choice, since they stand out the most among the selection, and primates do tend to rule the animal kingdom. But I said, nah, fuck that, I want to be a dinosaur. Immediately following this, I got my ass kicked by one of the monkey characters. I am a determined soul, however, so with a second look at the controls and a second look at each of the characters, I decided to go with long neck blue dude, because my logic is he probably has the longest reach. He does, but I still got my ass kicked a couple of times before I adjusted. There's something seriously weird about fighting as a non-human creature. Like, with human characters, I can learn moves and make a few educated guesses about how to win fights. With this, the dinosaurs move in very weird ways that my human mind just doesn't easily comprehend. There's no really good way to describe it. It's not a bad game, because it's really good, right? There are a lot of good things going on here. It's just very strange. You attack using 4 buttons. There's a quick punch, kick, and a ferocious punch and kick. The hit detection feels good. The backdrops and character models all look great, and the little survivors running around and cheering you on is pretty funny, but again, this game is just weird. I took some time to experiment between at least a couple of the characters, and it feels like there's a good enough balance between them, but I don't really think I would know for sure unless I spent more time, and I don't really feel like it, honestly. The novelty of dinosaur fighting wears off pretty quick. Last game up today is Virtua Fighter 2, and this port specifically was released in 1996. In this case, I use the word port very loosely, since this is more of a demake downgrade than anything else. I've played Virtua Fighter 2 on the Saturn, and it isn't the best fighting game ever, but it's so much better than this that it's not even comparable. The gameplay amounts to mashing the punch or the kick button, blocking once in a while, and hoping to hell you don't lose. In the real Virtua Fighter 2, fighting feels fast and fluid. It's got that fighting game snap you would expect to find. In this, the fighting feels slow and clunky. Imagine playing the original Prince of Persia, except it's a fighting game. After having played both of them, I can't believe Sega would kill off Eternal Champions to push Virtua Fighter, because that game is just so much better than this, no matter what port it is. The character designs in this game are all hilariously generic, with the closest things to memorable being Dollar Store Ryu and a ninja. The actual art and stages are pretty good, which is unfortunately the biggest problem with this entire game. The stages are all made with this point-casted 3D plane stage overlaid on top of a billboard backdrop, which likely uses up a shit ton of the available processing power of the Genesis. If the stages were instead just flat 2D sprite sets, the actual gameplay might be much faster, and in turn, the actual game itself would be much better. I really feel like that's the killer here. This would have been a perfectly fine 3-button fighter if it wasn't for the horrendously slow everything. Since it's also a 2D fighting game instead of a 3D fighting game, perhaps getting rid of the moon gravity would have also been a really good idea. I feel like there was potential here to make a good 2D Virtua Fighter, and it just didn't get any fine-tuning to make it feel better to play. It isn't the worst game I played today by a long shot, but it isn't good either. It's far from good, and I think this one is a solid pass. And that was 5 Genesis fighting games. The one key takeaway from today's set is that we live in a much better time now, where the ideas that make fighting games fun are pretty universally understood. Of all of the games I played today, Eternal Champions was by far the best, and it's a game that I plan on playing again because it warrants that kind of attention. Pit Fighter was by far the worst, and the other 3 titles can all be lumped together into the mid at best category. Nothing was inherently unplayable, but boy do I feel bad for kids in the 90s. I'm starting to think I understand where the 90s theme boom is coming from in the video game space. It isn't really about getting that hefty dose dose of childhood nostalgia. It's shell shock from the mountainous pile of crap they had to wade through in order to find any good games. They suffered through so much garbage that they can't really move beyond that, and honestly, I get it. Over the last little while, I played through 47 games, and of those games, I can think of like 5 that were good. 5 in 47 is really shitty odds. It's getting so bad that I'm starting to think certain things that I hated before are actually half-decent design decisions now, and my quest to play every game ever still is a long way to go. At least I can get some peace of mind in knowing that there are genuinely exceptional games mixed in with all of it. Thank you, and have a nice day.